Today we are going to be talking about industrialization, immigration, and the progressive era. Again, industrialization. So when you think of the word industrial, we're talking about factories. Factories. Manufactured goods. Manufactured goods. So the United States at this point in the mid 1800s, it made the shift from agriculture, from the South, to now industrialization. The northern states had the advantage because they didn't have much fertile soil or great climate conditions for farming, so the people are just more predisposed to it. It's an easier shift for them to adopt industrialization. This is also what gave the North an edge. They were more industrialized than the South, so they were able to just to pump out supplies out of their factories during the Civil War. So let's just put a timeline here. So let's call this the mid 1800s. So there was actually factories and other manufactured goods existed since the late 1700s, but this is a point where it really started to flourish. So we just say American industries boomed. And by exploded, I mean that they grew very rapidly, not that it exploded in their faces kind of way. So what were the reasons? Why? So it started, the causes were the addition of Western territories, that means more natural resources. The thing with manufactured goods is you still need raw materials. You still need natural resources. It's like now if you want to be a clothing manufacturer and you pump out a bunch of white t-shirts, you need to source your cotton from somewhere. So this are all prerequisites to industrialization. So more resources, you don't have to use the resource as a raw material, you have a surplus, you can make it into more things. So we have here, let me use a different color. You can just use them as is or turn it into something else. A very good example of this is someone who has expertise with cooking. Yeah, you can eat a tomato raw, you can eat bread by itself, you can eat a piece of salami, or you could just turn it into a pizza. You turn it into something else, and it's always going to be richer. For those of you who eat out and you're always price matching, it's going to be cheaper to buy the ingredients and then just make it at home by yourself compared to just buying it pre-made. But there's still business in having it pre-made. Frozen foods aisles are just very important, especially for young children, or also people who are just very busy, or don't have access to a kitchen, or don't have the skills. They can just pop like a little hot pocket into the microwave and they can still use it. So raw materials are important in both forms, and you can't really turn the raw material into something else. You're still going to need the raw material. This comes first, and the manufacturing comes when you have a surplus. So here, let me put a little note. So the addition of Western territories, and this has to do with like the Louisiana Purchase, Manifest Destiny. This is where we bought land from the French. That's why people in Louisiana, they will speak a lot of French, especially in the New Orleans area. And then we also have the concept of Manifest Destiny. It rolls very nicely off the tongue. Manifest Destiny just meant that the United States wanted to go from coast to coast. It felt that it was the United States' duty and destiny to go from the eastern coast, bordering the Atlantic Ocean, onward to the western coast, like where we have California now, to border the Pacific. So now it would have like two different fronts, two different ways to trade, and just have access to all these great resources, especially with the gold rush. That just like said, like, came here for copper, and I didn't expect to find gold. So more natural resources means you can turn something into those raw materials into something else. Great. And another reason is you have new machines. Especially things like the cotton gin. If you're able to be more efficient, you're able to pump out more goods. So if you're more efficient, it means you produce more goods and services. In less time or cost equals more profit. Okay, miss, this is kind of starting to sound a little bit like economics. You're kind of losing me. All right, let's use an example. You always want to be as efficient as possible. If I tell you to mow the lawn with a pair of scissors, that's going to take you a whole long time. Your fingers are probably going to get tired from like snipping at the scissors. But if I tell you to use a lawnmower to like mow the lawn, yes, it's going to be much more efficient. You may not have to like use electricity or gasoline to power the lawnmower if you're using the scissors, but you will use a lot of human hours. I would rather just pay for a gallon of gasoline than have to like cut the lawn with my bare hands and then like suffer with like maybe tendonitis or like some other ailment in my hands and be sore, and then just be unable to write for the next week or so. So then that just makes more profit. Same concept. So some of these natural resources that I forgot to mention were metals, fuels, especially things like coal, especially in the Colorado, Wyoming areas. There was a lot of like coal mining. This really helped, especially with heating, or also transporting with trains, because trains back then were powered either by steam or coal. And not only was it new machinery, it was a new process. So yes, I can have like a machine, but a certain methodology might help. Let's say, you know, like all of those like multi-level marketing scams, and I don't want to say any names in case I get a lot of haters on the videos. But a lot of those pyramid schemes, they try to sell you a process, but they're selling you something that like everybody else knows. Yeah, that's really not worth it. But here with industrialization, they were actually developing different processes for doing things. Again, it goes all back to being more efficient, making more goods for less, for less amount of actual raw material that you have to use in order to produce the same or even more output, yielding a higher profit. So a new process. So because of these reasons, the effects that we can still enjoy today is that easier, it was cheaper, to manufacture goods. And by goods, it's a product. It's a physical thing you can get. Versus a service, like internet service, like can't really touch my internet. Of worse is like my pen. This is a good. Except when it doesn't write, I call it a bad. So easier and cheaper, basically it's just more efficient. And another reason is increased population. Let me add it in here. Increased population means increased workforce. Think of it. If you're driving around, if you're walking around the mall, all of those little stores wouldn't be able to exist, if it wasn't for people that were able to work in the stores. If you don't have employees, you really can't have that store, can you? Same thing, that's why there's no malls in like very rural areas, because there's no one to work in them. And then even the more important part is there's no one to buy from those stores. You can have like 1,000 t-shirts at a great price, but if there's no one in that little town to buy things, then you're not going to sell. Same cool thing. If you have a large number of employees, you will also likely have a large number of customers. Your same employees can end up becoming your customers. If you've noticed, JCPenney, Target, Walmart, they all have employee discounts. Some of the money that the owner pays to the employee will just end up coming right back in. Very smart tactic. So increased population, increased workforce. Let's get into immigration. I know, especially since it's like hurricane season, it's when we have more rain down here in South Texas. We have a lot of people who have immigrated from countries further south from us, and they bring their different tools of trade with them. So there's a difference between immigrants and migrants. Migrate means to leave And immigrant means to like come in to like that nation. So the immigration created a lot of like super centers. So like where there's a, let's say here's a region. The population is going to grow at a steady rate, you know, as quickly as people are able to have babies, and then also the death rates. So like population is dictated by birth rate and death rate. But that takes a while. People have to be old enough to bear children, and then as there have been technological advances, the death rates have lowered, so it takes longer for people to die. But then nothing will change your population as quickly as immigration. If you want to add 10 people to the population, you're gonna have to like increase birth rates, or you could just have 10 new people who just move into the city. Wow. Much faster, much easier. So the biggest one is immigration. And this is in and out. So right here in South Texas, we have something called a brain drain. A lot of people leave South Texas because there's not a lot of high-level jobs, especially high-paying level jobs. So they'll move up to the San Antonio area or just relocate to a different area. But then there's also people, when they're Texans, who end up coming down here to South Texas, who really like the almost tropical climate down here. So then they'll move here, and they'll like bring back up the population again. So there's people come and go, but especially there are a lot of people coming in. So when there is a lot of where you're gonna see the population, different cities booming where there's more concentration of immigrants. So can we think of a few cities that boomed? We would say New York City. In fact, there's like different suburbs that are historically where different nationalities will like group. There would be Puerto Rican people who would like be in a certain suburb or different neighborhood. There would be people who were like German, different people who were Irish or French, Italian. So we had Boston, and these are because of this, with their large populations in the 1800s, these are still big cities today. Chicago, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh. And you may be wondering, well, where do these people come from? The people, should have used red. Most of them came from majority of European migrants were from Ireland, Germany, Italy, Russia, and other Eastern countries, specifically like the Balkans, Poland, former Czechoslovakia. That's not, those details are not as important. I'll just to save space, I'll say other Eastern European nations. So with Ireland, there was a huge potato famine, and this is what a lot of the people depended on. So when there was that famine, their main crop, there was a massive starvation. People lost their livelihood, and they just wanted to come to America for a new chance. And a lot of them ended up in these cities. With Germany, there was also different reasons people would want to leave their country. Italy, a particular reason people were living in Italy was because there was violence among the mafia, or people who were involved with the mafia, like on good or bad ends. They would have to, they would come to the United States, and then people, mafia who was chasing them would also go ahead and chase them into the United States. Russia, there was religious persecution for Christians and Jews at one point, especially when there was like revamping of their there was a lot of a civil war going on, as there was different power struggles. And then the same thing with different European nations. There's a lot of civil unrest. So their reasons for leaving, maybe they want to escape poverty. They also want to get religious asylum. Oh, I'm sorry, I misspelled this. Religious asylum. And I know the United States, if you've lived in the United States your whole life, it may not be as not significant. I would say it's not as impacting, but when you're in other countries where there's actually like a national religion that's enforced, you are persecuted, especially in the United States was one of the first countries to kind of like be allow religious freedom, because that's where the United States was founded from the Pilgrims. They were seeking a religious asylum, and that's always been a backbone of the United States, freedom of religion. They would also want to escape political unrest. And you're like, well, what does the average citizen have to do with political unrest? Well, depending on what side you're on the war, or you might be drafted into war. A lot of countries at the you are, once you are a citizen of a certain age, you are automatically put into their army. Here in the United States, we have the selective service where you're only enlisted if you're a male, an adult male, if we go into war. And then like there's always like, if you're willing to go, those are bumped up in the list. But even in Mexico, once you're of a certain age, you have to march for the Mexican military unless you pay a certain fine. Other countries, for example Sweden, everyone, both women and men have to march in their military. So some people, particularly people who don't believe in like supporting a military in that way, if it would conflict with their religious beliefs, you could see how they'd want to like leave that area. So the United States just held a lot of promise for these immigrants. So there was a force pushing them out of their country, and then there was an attraction to the United States. Remember, they could have gone like anywhere else, but there was a reason they wanted to come to the United States. And that's why we have the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty was a gift from France, talking about how it was a beacon of light for different people seeking to be in the United States. Other and let me also add, a lot of people came from Mexico and also from Central America. I also do want to point out that before the Louisiana Purchase, Texas was part of Mexico. So the people didn't move. The United States borders are also what moved. That's why I was very surprised when I went up north into Colorado. I walked into a Chick-fil-A and everyone was speaking Spanish. And I was like, huh, I traveled like nearly 1,000 miles up north into like United States territory, and I was so surprised to like hear Spanish as just a dominant conversation piece. It was so surprising, but it really shouldn't have been, because those people were there first. There was also there's some other people. There were also people who were coming in from Asia, but the United States put limits on Chinese immigrants. Their Chinese immigrants helped build the railroad that began to connect the eastern United States to the west. And then there were also Japanese people who came and they worked in like farm fields or mines. That was a staple work in the Japanese economy at that time, so they just kind of like just easily transferred over. It's if I was a farmer in one country and then I moved to a different country, well, it's just going to be much easier to become a farmer than to like take up a whole different trade. So people mostly brought their different skills to the United States, and it just made the United States much more richer. That's why the United States is called a melting pot. We have so many different accents here in the United States because we've had so many different like countries, different nationalities, so many different cultures just like come in and mix, where we're not just one thing, we're a combination of things, and that can be very good, but then it can also lead to a lot of disagreements at the same time. Now, I do want to talk about work conditions. So, there was no OSHA back in the day. In fact, I'll share this a little bit of a story of how OSHA came to being. But there was child labor. Children would work in these, they would get work in mines. They were smaller. They could go in smaller crevices, and they could like get a lot more things. However, as we know, children are developing. They're not as strong, and since they haven't fully developed, especially different parts of their lungs, their brains, they're just much more vulnerable to different things. So this would lead to a lot of people being exploited. And remember, this goes back to people who were immigrants. They didn't really have a home, so there would be like a family of like maybe like 6 people, and they would share a 1-bedroom apartment with another family of the same size. So that'd be like 12 people crammed in 1 bedroom. And then because the prices were so high, remember, rules of supply and demand, there's a limited number of apartments, but there's more people wanting to move into the city, the prices are gonna skyrocket. So there was child labor. There was also like very low pay. And you're like, well, why was there so low pay? Like, weren't these manufacturers turning over a profit? Yes, they were turning over a profit, but since they want to make even more of a profit, they're gonna exploit more people. One example of this is, I believe with Carnegie. I'll add that as a video link if you'd like to see that. So aside from the low pay, and the reason they were also able to leverage the low pay was because since there was so many like people, employees were easily replaceable. Employees were replaceable. I believe I spelled that wrong. But also the sadder part is that they began to treat them as expendable. So yes, a cashier at, for example, at McDonald's, there is a large amount. They do go through a different amount of training, different amount of skill, but the turnaround period to train another person is maybe like a month or so, compared to like being a statistical data analyst. That would probably take at least a bachelor's or a master's degree in statistics in order to get things. So that person is not easily as replaceable. They're not as easy to get. But when you have so many people fighting for a job, you can offer lower pay because people are desperate. They'll accept that lower pay. For those of you who have been migrant workers, the pay, when I've heard stories that students share, like how much they were paid, it's embarrassing that such a low pay is allowed. And for this reason, people are treated, especially, this would also go with people who don't have their high school equivalency degree, which is another reason I'm very proud of all of you taking this course, especially after it got shifted to online, is because you don't want to be treated as someone easily replaceable. You don't want to be just some expendable employee that if your employer doesn't want to just work with you, you're just fired on the spot for just someone else. So people were just very desperate. And the sad thing is that this became a vicious cycle. They already had low enough pay, they couldn't afford to lose their job, they became very desperate. So they'd put up with horrible conditions, and I would go back to the low pay again and again. There's even stories of seamstresses who would work with a sewing machine and be making dresses, and they said, do not break the needle. If you break the needle, you are fired, because that needle, that little sewing needle, costs more than you do. Oh my goodness, if I was working at a McDonald's and a spatula broke or something because it was very old, it was maybe had a manufacturing defect, and I'll be fired because of it. That'd be tragic. It's like if I was fired for my pen not working. I would try to fix it. I'd get another pen, or that sewing machine could just get a new needle. It just led to very unfair working conditions, and I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because I'm sure all of you have very vivid stories. If you feel comfortable sharing the story, you can go ahead and comment down below. It can also be another story that you've heard from someone else. That's fair game as well. So then this just became just too much. So people formed unions. Things like workers' comp, OSHA, all of this was created as a result of these poor working conditions. So these unions, what did it advocate for? We want safer working conditions. If I'm a welder, I want to be able to wear something to protect my eyes. If I'm just working in anything that can has a threat to my health Like if there's fumes that like have been known to like cause people to faint, yeah, I want good ventilation in that area. If the fumes I'm working with are very flammable, I want I want also very good ventilation. That way there's not as much flammable things. I also want a lot of exits. I don't want to be trapped in the middle of a coal mine or in a little shop just working with different and only having one tiny little exit or door exit and entrance that if it like catches on fire I can't escape. You want safer working conditions. You also want fairer pay. So you can like ask all you want, but they found what was more effective were strikes. So a very effective strike that happened closer to modern day is when New York City's the garbage collection went on strike because they weren't being paid a fair wage. So everyone just agreed to go on strike, and the garbage was just pouring onto the streets. There was no one to pick it up. It wasn't being collected. It was just garbage bags all over all the streets. Now, working as a New York City garbage collection, it's actually one of the best paying jobs in the United States. There's a huge waiting list to work there, so I don't recommend that as your backup plan. So a strike was a reaction, or they striked when there was pay cuts, or when they would just not or refuse to give raises. I will also say that if you have been if your employer misses a paycheck, that's a huge red flag. Like, start looking for another job at that point. If there's been like a hardship with the company and they've addressed this with everyone and they're like doing like a rolling basis for the paychecks, okay, you can kind of like work with the company. They might even ask you, will some people take time off? That way we don't, that way like the people who are working get like more chance of getting like paid. That's perfectly understandable. That's a good employer relationship. But I've seen, and it's very common down here, especially like with like small businesses, that like when the paychecks like keep on coming late or there's missed paychecks, you're not legally obligated to keep going to work. And if you're afraid to quit because you don't want it to look bad on your resume or your work history, any other employer should understand. And if one other employer does not understand that, you don't want to be working in that place, because that's the same kind of employer that you're trying to escape from. So when these employers said like, we're not going to give you a raise, or they like did pay cuts to like retaliate, people just say, you know what? You ain't got no business. Excuse me. You don't have a business if we don't have any employees to work for you. That will work. That sometimes does work, but there have been times where like the employer is very powerful. Same thing with like the coal mines and like lumber yards owned by like different, by like Carnegie and 1800s, and they involved the military and like to like attack people on strike. That was not necessary. That was not within the bounds of, or also the same thing with Morgan and Chase. It wasn't ethical, and it was just a way that employers kept on trying to like squeeze out their profit. So that's why we have a lot of these laws. Now that we have all these OSHA laws, that's why like once a year your employer has to go around making checks, and like if you work at different places, they have to keep up to code. They need to make sure that there's always a restroom, that there's like warm water for employees to wash their hands, that there's soap available, because if they don't fulfill these requirements, they're no longer OSHA compliant, among other things. So because of this, modern day, now we at least have, it's very rare now that you see people who work 7 days a week. They started giving like 1 day off so people could like practice their religious day of worship, whether it was a Saturday or Sunday, depending on your religion. So this kind of evolved into 8 to 12 hour work week. And then the 5-day work week. Work day. You work 8 hours a day, not a week. And then we have the 5-day work week. That's why we hear people say, oh, I have a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 job. Because of all of this, work conditions, these different things, how people ended up retaliating and trying to be fair for the employee, now we have this. So we can thank people standing up and in light of their suffering, that now we can enjoy this. And we also stopped child labors. Now the minimum age to work is 16, but there used to be like parental consent. A minor is very limited in what they can work as. So there was like, because of industrialization, there was like this led to like work issues. There's safety and fair pay. And once the ball started rolling, this started to become called the progressive era. This is where things were trying to be more fair. There was better health care. There was more healthcare available to different people. There was like larger hospitals being funded. It was improving the quality of life. And this just made the United States an even more attractive place to move to. So it also cleaned up slums. So like there was a lot of like really, really bad neighborhoods. So there was a lot of crime in those neighborhoods. It was also very unsanitary. It was also very dangerous. People were living like in these multi-level apartments that were like on the verge of falling or collapsing. That was a thing. Different different dwellings weren't built properly. They were built very cheaply. So then if there was a fire, it would just go up in flames so quickly. There were so many cases where actually this still applies to modern life. Different places where like a lot of our clothing is like made in China, made in India, made in Sri Lanka, made in Honduras. So a lot of those what the United States already went through is that exploitation is occurring in different countries right now, and there's been like massive like fires, or like buildings have collapsed, even though like it was widely known that those buildings were no longer safe to be in, and it just resulted in so many deaths of like of workers in the like textile industry, textile meaning like clothing. And that's why like there's been also like a big push against fast fashion, by fast fashion I mean like Zara's, Forever 21, just for like trends for clothing and style just change so quickly, forcing the consumer to buy more, who wants it at a cheaper price, and like you end up with poor quality and like low pay for people. That's why you're seeing there's a trend. Not trying to be make a pun. I meant by trend as in like a movement of like people now wanting to opt for like quality clothing, where you might see like an $80 white t-shirt versus a $5 white t-shirt, and like there's comparisons between like what is higher quality. There was also in the women gained the right to vote. Women, the way the U.S. Constitution was written, it said men, not like mankind, but as in males, and it excluded women. Other states were ahead of the curve, though. Other states did allow women to vote before it became like national across the United States. So like women voting. Also, I guess I'll have to say clean up slums. That's what you call like a really bad neighborhood. Another word would be like ghetto. I'm not saying like, I know the term is like ratchet and everything, like ghetto, like dude, that's like such a good neighborhood, like you shouldn't go there. I know that's used like as a certain like if you're calling it like it's like a bad neighborhood. Yes, that's literally what a ghetto is. It's just a really bad neighborhood, or where someone's like kind of like trapped in that place against their will and no hope of ever getting out. Yeah, that turned very dark very quickly. And also they wanted to create national parks. This was very much so because of like former President Roosevelt's wife, who was like very much into like especially since she was also a woman, she also advocated for women's voting rights, and also like healthcare, like cleaning up slums, and also creating national parks. So this was called the Progressive Era. This is where you're starting to see like, okay, there's been a change to like what the United States was at first. It was just mostly crops, and it was people hunting and like trading furs, and then we started making our own like goods. The United States was actually ahead of the curve of like the majority of Europe in like adopting industrialization. Or was it behind the curve? Well, when the United States became industrialized, it allowed for all of these other things to happen. And this is where like the United States, like, look, there's healthcare, whereas with President Washington, they used to use leeches on like cutting off arms for as a form of healthcare, or pulling out teeth. Women did not have the right to vote at the beginning of this nation's history. There were also no national parks. Everything was just like fair game. Like that's where people were not allowed to be squatters. Squatters is just people just move onto someone else's land. So that would be the progressive era. So we're starting to see the United States become more of what we know it to be today. So do let me know, what are some things that, what are some issues that still kind of continue to happen today? Fair pay is a huge thing going on right now because a lot of people don't want to go back to work right now because they're making more off of the unemployment compared to what they were being paid before. So yeah, these are some problems that they try to be fixed, but then the opposing party does other things, so it's just like going back and forth, and you're just trying to like make it fair enough. And the pessimist would say like, stop bothering because it's always gonna like not be in your favor. I think we should just keep on trying because otherwise we're gonna end up just being like beat down on the ground. But if we keep on trying, we're gonna at least make it a little bit fair for us. I mean, it has to be fair for both parties, but we also want to make sure that we are okay and able to provide for ourselves and for our families and just live well. Alright, I'll see you in the next video.